here with Lou and Pat Saunders, and I'm sure that there are many stories about Studebaker and just life in general back in those days that we'll have them share. So first off, I'm really honored to be here in just the comfort of their home and to be able to take the time to just chat and reminisce about some things. So Lou, Pat, first off, thank you for having me here to be able to chat with you about this.
Well, this is ancient history.
At least we'll get to record it on modern tech too, so that it might last.
That's amazing equipment.
I have the weight here to prove it.
Yeah, I'm starting to lose mine, so I won't have proof if I get older eventually, and we'll and do that. But
Well,
anyway,
there are wigs.
Well, it's true. I've donned a couple before for Halloween. I will say that there have been some cases where I'll completely change my look if I wanted to.
Yeah.
But anyway, to you though, first off, Lou and Pat, I think maybe we can just start right from the beginning if you want. And I don't know, because let me start with this actually. When did you join Studebaker?
1962 in the fall.
1962. So it was one of the later years, just before it was.
I was there
closing,
3.5 years, until it shut down in 1966.
Yeah.
So I stayed there right to the final end.
Right to the final there.
Yeah.
But before that, maybe we can start from before your Studebaker days, and if you just have anything to reminisce about, and just what life was like in those years.
Yeah. Well, well, I don't know. I was telling you about 1940s.
Yes.
You want me to tell you that again?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure. I think just in case it was because it was in rehearsal, if you will.
I spent my youth in Ancaster. I don't say I grew up in Ancaster. I spent my early years in Ancaster, and as a young kid, our house backed onto the golf course, the Hamilton Golf and Country Club, which was the main golf club for all the elites in Hamilton, all the managers and the presidents and all that sort of thing, the mayor and everything. And so I used to go over and caddy, and I'd hear all these people talking, I was just part of the woodwork, so I'd overhear that. But a lot of them drove Studebakers because they were made in Hamilton, and there were a whole bunch of them that were in the office in Studebaker, so they were there, including the president, and his name was Gus Gaskin.
Gus Gaskin, yeah.
Gus was the guy who, if he went into a used car lot, this guy you expect to see was Gus Gaskin. He was that kind of guy. He talked a lot. He was big, and he could sell cars, I know.
Oh, gee.
And overhearing conversations about him from other people when he wasn't around. They talked about how when things aren't going very well at the plant, sometimes they have orders, sometimes they didn't. He would get on a train and go out west and go to the dealers, and he would come back with a whole bunch of paperwork, orders from those dealers, so they could continue building cars in Hamilton. That was the story of him.
So he really was a sales guy in that case.
He was the president, but he was the sales guy.
Had that kind of acumen to do that. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. In 1962, I was looking for a job. I'd quit the bank. I'd worked for 3 or 4 years in a bank, and I found I couldn't afford them.
Even working for them too, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I worked there, and I managed to acquire an MGA coupe. It was a brand new one, and
at the time,
I really liked that car. And I ended up going to a dance at McMaster, and I met a lady who really liked my car, and we got along very well. So that was 1963, and we got married in 1964.
Oh, wow.
And I still owed money on this MG, so I sold it so I could have some money to go on a honeymoon, etc. And I picked up a used old Studebaker to drive us around. And it was a 51 four-door sedan with 100,000 miles on it.
Already on it?
And
okay.
it was It was tired. That's what it was. It was a nice car.
It was past its prime.
Past its prime.
Oh, yes.
Her name was Nellie.
Oh, there was a name too. That's fantastic.
yes.
Yeah.
My wife names cars, but so
Yeah.
anyways, that's how I ended up. But I ended up applying for a job at Studebaker just on the whim,
Yeah.
and they said, "Yeah, we have an opening in our factory office. Can you start next week?" So I went in next week, and first thing they said, "Well, you can type, can't you?" And I said, "Well, not really." "Well, you're going to learn very quickly, because what your job is," and what it was I had to deliver sheets of paper out to the plant. We were running 6 units an hour,
Right.
8-hour shift, one shift. We were building 48 units a day. And paperwork would come down from upstairs, and I would have to translate it on another piece of paper, and it's a Gestetner operation. And
Yes.
I would have to run about 50 copies of this thing, and then I'd run out to the plant and deliver them around the various stations so that they'd know what to
wow.
build.
So
You know, they'd get the right color, they'd get the right trim, they'd
Yeah.
get the right engine, they'd get the right
Everything.
axle, the right transmission, all those things that were, you know, whether it's a 2-door, 4-door, that sort of thing.
So you had to type on all these different
I,
copies.
I had to type them in certain places.
Oh, gee.
I got pretty good at it because I had to get very good at it, because if I didn't, that plant was shut down.
Yeah, because those typewriters weren't. It was on typewriters. You'd have to get them on, or a specialized
Yeah,
type
it was
of.
some sort of typewriter.
Some
I
type
can't
of-
really remember too much of the details
That's
because
fair.
it was so long ago.
Yeah,
but-
well, because that's all. You always wonder if they were electric at the time, or if they were still very much mechanical. Because I know it was kind of that time where
That's a good question.
they were starting to come in. I know there were some popular models back then. But
I would say mechanical.
It might have been mechanical. I think that was-
so even more so. If you
whatever it was, it worked.
you had to be pretty fast. I
Yeah.
think you have to be really fast on those ones
Yeah.
anyway.
So
but, yeah.
we had a factory office. It was a small factory office. We were all in a very close space, and there was 3 of us in the lower levels, and I worked my way up from delivering line sheets to planning freight cars loading. You know.
Oh, like the cargo on the cars?
Yeah,
And-
I had to plan how these cars. I'd have to get together a certain number to get into a box car.
Yeah.
So that and decide where they were going to go. So that was an interesting job.
Very much so, yeah. But it was always the office for you though, from 63 or 62, is it, right up until the closing of the plant, essentially?
Yeah. We when the plant shut down, we were running 2 shifts because back I worked there about 2 years, and they shut the plant down over in the States, shut down operations.
Yeah.
So they continued building cars in Hamilton because apparently we were making a profit. But we were an assembly plant. All we did was take parts from everywhere, shipped in, put them together, paint them, ship them out.
Yeah.
It wasn't, we didn't manufacture anything. We just assembled things.
Which in part would explain why the last year Studebakers were mostly just, I think they even had a different non-Studebaker engine, right, at some point there?
Yeah, that was interesting too, because when they shut down South Bend, they kept the engine plant running for a little while to supply us with engines.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was that we received these engines, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder engines. They were good engines. Now, back in the day, on your registration, there was a serial number that had to be on your registration, an engine serial number. They
Yeah.
don't do that anymore. But back then, it was alphanumeric. And it became apparent a little while that some of the guys making these engines weren't terribly happy about losing their jobs, and the alpha ended up sneaking in a few letters that weren't kosher. You know,
Oh.
you wouldn't,
Yes.
you didn't want them on your registration.
Right.
So this was a little bit of a panic in the office. Somebody went out and got some stamps so they
Yes.
could re-stamp them so that there would be, they wouldn't be obscene.
Right, that's true.
That's one of the little stories.
A more proper serial. It's interesting. Yeah, you wouldn't think even right down to the serial numbers where something like that could happen, right? But
that got me. But
Yeah.
after a while, those engines ran out, so they made a deal with General Motors and McKinnon Industries in St. Catharines to supply engines for our Studebakers.
Yes.
They're Chevrolet engines, if you would.
yeah, yeah.
But back in the day, Studebaker had bought a company which had oil additives which they put in their engines,
Yeah.
and they were very proud of it, and they claimed it extended the life of the engines and everything.
Oh, yeah.
General Motors wasn't so happy about that, and word came down that if you keep putting this stuff, I'll say, in the engines, we're not going to warranty them.
Ah, yeah.
But eventually
Yeah.
they did resolve the issues. So
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
But it was just for that last year because that was the only engine that they could supply
yeah,
the Studebaker
yeah,
bodies
yeah,
at the time,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when the Avro airplane shut down,
A few years prior, yes. Yeah.
Malton, they hired two of the engineers to come, and they were quality guys. And one of them was, his name was Len, and he had an office, and I had a desk outside him where I was doing my job. And
Yeah.
we got to know each other, sort of socialized a little bit. And he came out one day and he said, you know, I've got this Studebaker stock. I guess he was getting it as a bonus for working for Studebaker. But he said, this Studebaker stock is not going anywhere. It was down around $15, and he says, I don't see it going anywhere. He says, I'm going to get rid of this stuff. It wasn't more than 2 or 3 weeks later, they shut down South Bend. All of a sudden, that stock went immediately from $15 up to 80-something dollars.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah,
So-
lesson learned.
Yeah, should have waited just a little bit more just before going to sell that stock back. But yeah, was the stock ever good though? In those before, obviously prior to that, jumping up to $80.
Yeah, before then it was making cars back in the 60s, late 50s was not a profitable thing, especially when you're low volume like that.
Right.
So they were losing money hand over fist. They had a board that was, I guess, a bunch of Studebaker ancestors that were sort of in charge of things. And one thing they were doing was they were paying themselves, they were issuing money, whether they made money or not, from the
Yeah.
factory. So they weren't putting money back into design and things that they should have been doing.
Yeah.
So they were doomed from the start. But losing a lot of money like that, they didn't have to pay any taxes because it was a losing proposition. But
Interesting.
but
Yeah.
back then, as in today, if you have a loss of profits,
Yeah.
you can carry that loss to your profits for the next years and not pay taxes on them and a good example of that is Donald Trump, who has gone bankrupt several times and has accumulated huge amounts of debt on the paper. So he doesn't pay any income tax, and he hasn't paid any income tax for years.
It's a clever trick, right? You got to know the tricks of the ways to be able to. Yeah, and that would figure.
Studebaker was the same, but they took that, but they ended up owning a bunch of companies that were making money, and they ended up taking that profit and putting it into buying other companies that were making profit, because they didn't have to pay any tax on that profit until they reached the point where they owned several companies that were making a lot of money.
Oh, wow.
And not paying any taxes. Except they had this company that was building cars that was losing money.
Interesting.
So the big bosses the guy in charge, he said, well, stop making cars.
Yes, stop getting wherever there's no problem. Yeah, that's funny where that's the one thing that they started from, right?
Yeah.
With making cars.
So they did shut down the plant, the operations.
Yeah.
Except for Hamilton. They said Hamilton's making some money, so we'll keep them going for a little while.
Yeah.
Because we might as well take the money.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
However,
Lou, did you ever buy any of the stock?
no, you never buy stock in the company you're working for.
Interesting.
That's a given.
They never gave you discounts or anything, did they?
No, not at my level.
Oh, I see. I see.
I was just a little guy, but the interesting office we had was the plant manager. He was a vice president. Bill Mosier, he lived in Ancaster, and I got to know him pretty well. He had been brought in a year or so before me. He wasn't really an automotive guy, but I could go to him and tell him what my problems were, and he was sympathetic, and we got to know each other very well. So I got to know that I could go to him and ask a question, and I'd get a straight answer. And things that were going on, I could get clarification.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot of things that most people never learned.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, like the insider almost kind of, in a sense, kind of insider little tips and tricks.
Just happened to be there.
Yeah.
And there was interesting stories. I can tell you a few of them if you like.
Go for it. Yeah, if anything comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing that comes to mind is that advertising. Back in the day, you remember Hockey Night in Canada?
Yeah.
It was all Imperial Oil. You know,
big sponsor,
it
right?
was the total sponsor.
Yes.
Except shortly after I joined Studebaker, they started advertising some Studebakers.
Oh.
So that became Imperial Oil and Studebaker.
And Studebaker for that period of time.
That was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, another thing that happened somewhere along the line, I forget, they had a contest to sell Studebakers, and the deal was in if you bought a certain magazine, I forget which one it was, there was a number in it, and if you took that number to the dealer, you could check their list of winners, and there were supposed to be 5 cars given away.
Yeah.
And if you had that number, then you won that car. But you had to go to the dealer just to get that. So that went on, and I at the end of the contest, I said to him, you know, how many cars did they give away? And his answer was, hopefully none, because we used our whole advertising budget on the advertisement. If somebody won a car, I'm not sure what we would have done.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true. Did you ever work or interact much with the advertising department while you were there?
No.
At Studebaker? Because I know they were pretty big on advertisements. Now, I know we were talking just before we recorded, and we all come from, I think we all come from McMaster. We're alumni of McMaster. Pat as well, right?
Yeah.
And I actually happened to, I should have brought them here. I have been amassing yearbooks over the years, and because I was always curious about how the campus looked like, you know, in certain years before, what the activities were, and there were some roughly from about in the period between 1957, about 57 to basically roughly till Studebaker was there, where I'd look in the back and look at all the sponsors, the ads that were back there, and I'd see different eras of Studebaker. You know, there's the Studebaker Packard days or something, and then later years, and so I was always curious because I know they were pretty big on advertising too. I think, right?
Well, they had hired after me sometime a fellow to do the advertising. Stu Chapman, I think is his name.
Yes. Yeah.
I never got to see Stu Chapman in the plant, or I used to go up to the main office and walk past all these offices. And one thing I noticed was Stu Chapman, but he had a secretary, and she was gorgeous. Matter of fact, I know other people walk by that office just to have a glance at her. So, anyways, she was sort of famous for that. Anyways, when we shut down the plant, Stu went off and started up a business in Burlington in partnership with her. They were equal partners in the, and that's where I finally met Stu up in Markdale. We lived up in there, and they had an old car show. People came around, and I saw Studebaker, and I went and looked at it, and I said, I used to work at Studebaker, and he said, I worked at Studebaker. His name was Stu Chapman.
Interesting. You finally,
so I got to meet him.
at some point, yeah, there you go. So that was pretty interesting, yeah. I was going to say when your wife just looked over when you were talking about that secretary, I was going, people probably were like, what were you thinking back in those days there, Lou? I wonder.
Did he leave his wife and marry her?
No.
I just.
No. There was
I
nothing.
wondered if
There was nothing
more.
there. There was nothing there.
I was wondering if there was more. Of
No. There
So
wasn't
it was
anything.
mere coincidence that it happened that they were business
But
partners then.
I think she was quite smart.
That's fair. Probably had that kind of business spirit.
yeah.
Didn't we meet him
Oh yes.
at a dance thing once?
Where?
Some Studebaker thing.
No, I never went there.
Well, we went to an event down in. It had nothing to do with the plant.
Okay.
It was the Studebaker Drivers Club
Yeah.
down in Belleville.
Yeah,
When we went for a whole weekend,
Yeah,
I thought he was there.
it could have been.
Just an Ontario chapter event, it might have been.
The
that had it
Ontario
there?
chapter invited us down.
Ah.
It was an anniversary or something, and they
Yeah.
invited several of us down there. I didn't belong to the Owners Association back then, but they invited both of us down, and there's about 6 of us that were Studebaker employees.
Oh, I see.
That was a great weekend.
They entertained us.
And the best cars.
Yeah.
Sounds like it must have been.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Good.
I'm a car girl.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I like cars.
I think it goes here. We were talking that there was a name for the Studebaker that you had. Was it the Studebaker or was it the MGA that you had? That you had, there was a name for one of the cars that you'd given, for
Oh,
instance.
our Studebaker.
It was a Studebaker, yeah.
Which I think was a 52.
51.
51?
Yeah.
It didn't like climbing mountains. And her name was Nellie.
Oh, yes.
The old gray mare.
Ah,
Yeah, it was a gray car. Yeah.
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 How suitably so, yeah. But were there any cars, Pat, that you loved growing up as well, or?
I married an MGA. Oh,
That's true.
I learned
That is
to
true.
drive on a 52 Ford.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And
Oh,
my
yeah.
dad was such a car guy that he started letting me drive when I was about 14. And I did a lot of driving of a little Volkswagen they had once. And my first car that I owned myself when I started working was a Volkswagen Beetle.
Okay,
And it
yeah.
was a lovely green color on the outside and blue on the inside. And it was named Ernest.
Ernest, yeah.
All cars have names.
Yes. Actually, the car I have driving in my Subaru was the previous owners named her Susie. So I said I'd better hang on to the name too. I'm not
Okay.
going to bother changing this name and say
What
Susie
kind
the
of a- What
Subaru.
kind of a Subaru do you have?
Say it's an Impreza, little
Let's get back to
hatchback.
Studebakers.
But,
Okay.
Yeah.
well, yes, reverting back to there, I know Lou's got a lot more Studebaker specific questions
Oh,
and
yeah.
stories.
Subaru too.
Yeah, I've written a few things here.
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah. It says Studebaker built Conestoga wagons back at the turn of the previous century
Yeah.
in a factory a couple of years before it closed. And they were, at the turn of the century, Studebaker was building as many as 100,000 wagons in this multi-story factory in South Bend. That's all the big thing.
Yes.
Anyways, this Conestoga wagon was built to haul families out west with all their possessions, and I observed that it was tiny. We had one in the plant. Somebody had brought it into the plant, and it stayed there. The box was not 4 feet wide and maybe 6 feet long.
Oh, wow.
The canvas was, as you see in the Western movies, with the ballooning
Yep.
section.
That typical, yeah.
That's, when the plant shut down, I was told it was going to be shipped back to South Bend, but did it go there?
Oh,
That's
interesting.
that's my question.
Yeah. Was it like you found they're lost in transit or something, or
I don't know.
it's a mystery still to this day?
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that after that.
Oh, I see. So it still remains a mystery to this
Yeah.
day. But it's interesting how there was a link there with the
Yeah.
wagons and,
Yeah.
and South Bend. Yeah.
One thing about that plant in Hamilton was that it was down in the industrial area.
Yeah.
There was a lot of soot that drifted in on the plant. And in the summertime, in the factory office, we didn't have air conditioning. They left the windows open.
Oh.
And I would come in on a Monday morning, and the soot would be just covered my desk. I'd have to wipe it
my.
off.
Wow.
It was dirty. It was dirty.
How did that affect the cars that were built that
Okay,
were outside?
that's my story. One winter, we had about 100 cars out in the yard. They'd built them either under spec, to have them sold,
Yeah.
or they'd been canceled orders. But 100 of them sat out there, and we had a snowstorm, and it built up a layer of snow on top of the cars, and it stayed there for quite a while. The soot settled on the snow, and then finally the snow melted, and the soot came down, and it ate the paint on about
boy.
100 cars out there. Decision had to be made.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Are we going to scrap the cars? They ended up repainting them all
Oh.
at great expense. of
Oh
course.
my, yeah. Well, I mean, that was a lot of cars to lose in
Yeah.
a day, right? Because that was basically almost a couple days worth of assemblies, I'd say,
Yeah.
give or take, about 100 cars. But that soot must have been, I figure it must have, the buildings would have shown it too, right? I'm sure the plant was, the walls must have been soot covered as well, and whatever,
it
all
probably
that.
was.
That very gritty industrial sort of
I
look.
just remember it on my desk.
You know, the soot wasn't just there. We lived in an apartment in the lower part of Hamilton, and we could not use our balcony.
Oh wow! Because it just went. The soot reached all the way from that industrial sector to. But it was a very industrial city at the time,
Yeah.
though, I'm sure, and so
was.
while those are super active. But,
Yeah, another thing I thought I'd mention was
Yeah.
that sometimes, employees were sometimes customers, but the factory workers, they knew when their car was coming through, so they'd take a close look at them.
yeah.
One case, they had the guy worked on the floor pan. He welded that in place. He snuck in a second floor pan because rust was a big problem with Studebakers.
Yeah.
That was there was a good reason for that. But
I see.
anyways, he put 2 floor pans in it, and then he finally got delivery of it, and he drove it home over the rough roads in Hamilton. And those 2 floor pans rubbed together, and he had a squeak that he could do nothing about.
Yeah, I remember we had passengers and wonder what's that horrendous squeaking noise? And all those are just my floor pans
Yeah.
coming together there.
And
Yeah.
there was another guy who had he was able to put extra sealant in the doors.
Oh, okay.
Maybe to cut down on the noise or something.
Yeah.
But what he ended up doing was plugging the drain holes so that when it rained, he had a pond inside his door, so it would go slosh, slosh, slosh.
The little quirks of those Studebakers, I
Yeah.
guess, wasn't it? Yeah.
And one story I heard related to a popular priest in Hamilton down in the East End, and he drove a Studebaker.
Okay.
And he
yeah.
ordered one,
Yeah.
but he didn't want to have the top model but he wanted the top model. So he ended up getting a plain-looking Studebaker with all the top trim. There are 3 levels of trim.
Yeah,
He ended
typically,
up
yeah.
with the interior big.
Oh boy.
That was the story that I heard.
So an unassuming car on the outside, but when you went in, it was like a whole different luxurious feeling, essentially, right?
Because they were very comfortable. The
sure.
top end thing.
Top end thing. Yeah, they had some interesting features, especially some of the cars for sure that
Yeah.
felt very luxurious.
Yeah.
Did you have any favorite features on? I mean, you only did have the 51, right, or that particular one. But of the cars that you had, or that you may have seen while you were there at Studebaker,
Yeah.
were there any favorite features or things you liked about the later Larks? I think it was mostly Larks they were building, right?
Mostly
the
ours.
time. And,
We ended up with the Grand Turismo, I think.
yeah.
And Studebaker owned Paxton superchargers.
Okay.
That was one of the things that they had bought. So they added that on some of the cars. And I don't think we added it. I think the cars came in that way from the States.
Oh, interesting.
But
yeah.
I remember one of them sitting there, and they said they were going to drive it to Toronto. They said you fill it up with gas in Hamilton, you'd go to Toronto, then you'd fill it up with gas so you come back, because that thing sucked gas like you wouldn't believe.
Oh boy, imagine that actually. Yeah.
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 But that gave them a big, because Andy Granatelli, which is a famous racer, he was involved with the Paxton superchargers and
Oh,
that sort
interesting.
of thing.
Yeah.
He had Studebaker.
Didn't your parents buy one of those last Studebaker Larks?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. They hauled a trailer out west in this little Studebaker. Not a good idea.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, let me tell you about rally car.
Okay.
One year they appeared on the floor at Studebaker, all decked out as a rally car. We were told it was going to be a factory-sponsored car in an upcoming Trans-Canada event. In the previous event, a privately run car had done very well in this extremely grueling event, and a win would be good advertising for the future. A few weeks later, I inquired about the results, but nobody knew anything. I asked around some more and finally given this story. The rally is mostly run on off-road conditions, like lumber trails, etc. The Studebaker was performing well until it had to cross a big stream at speed, of course. Partway across, a big bang was heard. The engine went dead, and they coasted to the far side. Looking back, a gas tank was seen in the middle of the stream. A long wait, and cars were passing, no help arrived. This put them out of contention. The driver, out of desperation, hit the starter, and the engine roared to life. The car was put into gear, and away they went around the corner, where they found the car that had lost the fuel tank. Rally cars in the future events installed fuel tanks in the trunk.
Yeah. Interesting bit of history there, isn't it? Yeah, a whole fuel tank just sitting out there just goes
Yeah.
missing. That's quite.
That was one of the inside stories that nobody was going to talk about.
Oh, it's frightening though. If you were the driver of that car and
Yeah.
all of a sudden you lose your fuel tank and all of a sudden you're coasting off.
Yeah.
You never know what'll happen there. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I talk about shipping cars.
Sure.
I ended up planning rail shipments of the cars out. And when I started, we loaded them in 40-foot rail cars. They were called Evans car, and they held 4 cars because they drive one each side, and then they'd tilt it up, crank it up, and then they could drive 2 more cars in. It was packed right in there.
Oh,
it was
interesting,
very
yeah.
very labor-intensive thing,
Well,
but that's how
yes.
that's how rail cars were shipped.
Yeah.
A little while later, they came up with a bi-level that they could put 3 cars on 2 levels inside the plant. We all shipped outside the plant.
Yeah.
Then later on, when we were doing 2 shifts, we got to use the tri-levels. They were brand new, and they were outside, and you had 3 levels. And
Okay. Yeah.
so they installed a new rail line in, and then a platform where they could load these cars, and we could ship maybe 1 rail car a day because we only shipped into Canada.
Right.
We couldn't ship across the border.
Yeah.
That was another story.
I see.
But the thing was, they had hired an engineer to do designs around the plant, and he designed the rail line in.
Okay.
Oversaw the building of it.
Yeah.
The first rail car was brought in, and then the railway hauled up a car into that position. Next morning, we went out, the rail car wasn't there.
Oh.
it rolled down the ramp. He hadn't had it built level,
Oh man.
so it had to be
Little oversight
redone,
then, yeah.
and he had to look for a job.
Oh, boy.
That was a costly mistake then as a result, surely, yeah.
Yeah, when we went to 2 shifts after the plant in the States closed down, we were shipping cars to the United States.
Yeah.
But they couldn't ship these tri-levels because there was a tunnel that they wouldn't fit
All
under.
the clearance was, there wasn't
So
enough clearance for them to get
they
through,
were
yeah.
all trucked down to Buffalo.
Yeah.
And then shipped over so they could be put on rail cars over there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see that.
So they rented another big yard down in the east end of Hamilton, and they shipped them down there so the marshaling area so
Yeah.
they could ship them out of there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because they just couldn't directly. Did they ever get it resolved? I'm sure they must have at some point been able to finally get them
Yeah.
to go directly from Canada into the
Yeah.
U.S. and back.
Yeah.
But,
It was my job to do the bill of lading to tell the railroad where to ship these cars.
yeah.
And back when we were just shipping the little rail cars that held 6 each,
Yeah.
I made a mistake.
Oh.
I should have been fired because the cars that were going to Winnipeg ended up in Quebec City,
Oh.
and the ones in Quebec City ended up in Winnipeg or someplace like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had just, for some reason or other, I took full blame for it, and they said, "What are we going to do?"
yeah.
It was going to cost more than they wanted to spend to ship them to the right place.
Yeah.
We'll just reorder them, and we'll sell those cars there. That's
Yeah.
what they did.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Little opportunity for the extra stock
Yeah.
that they had for each of those cars. Then. Yeah, yeah. Going back to it, I think we were talking about where you had this stuff going through a Gestetner. Maybe we should explain that too, in case anybody, if you're watching, you have no clue what a Gestetner is. There's a chance maybe you've never seen one before, because these things they're quite fascinating though, right?
Yeah.
Little machine that goes round and round,
Yes,
and if you
yes.
want to make photocopies,
You
right?
back in the day, before we had photocopies, it was
Yes.
just a copying machine.
Right.
And you put in the chemicals and then the paper, and out came the paper with whatever it was that you were printing. It was
Yeah, even schools I think had these, right? Maybe when
Oh,
you were
yeah.
at during your
yes.
studies and times.
Yes.
I know. I think we can plug
Only
Pat
the
into this, right?
secretaries could run the Gestetner. But we had dittos too.
Yes.
These were similar to dittos back then.
I see.
No,
I
quite
don't
a
know.
different process.
Okay, I'm not up on that stuff anymore.
Gestetners were used to reproduce exams in the high schools where I taught.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the
All right,
60s.
getting back to Studebakers, another thing I wanted to mention was every once in a while a mistake could be made in the plant. For instance, a two-door had to have, the front seat had to fold down so you could get into the back seat. However, the guys putting in the seats, they would see a car coming up, and it would make a blue Terrier, and there's the blue seat, so they'd end up with a bench seat. And that would go through the whole system until it was ready to ship, and somebody
Oh,
would
my.
notice, hey, we got the wrong seats in there. So that would have to be changed.
But
The other thing that interesting, sort of along the same line, people not paying attention, you'd have a green car, and somehow or other, someone would put a blue trim inside, and nobody else would notice, and it would be completely trimmed in blue with a green car on the outside.
Yeah.
This was not something that somebody had ordered.
Yes.
And that would go all the way through the system until they were ready to ship it. And the word would go upstairs to the sales department, what are we going to do? And there was a dealer in northern Quebec,
Yeah.
it might have been Plamondon, I forget what his name was, but he would take those cars because they loved them up there.
Oh,
This was
Yeah.
their kind of car.
Interesting,
So anything that
interesting.
showed up, you
Yeah.
know, blue inside, green and blue outside.
very exotic
That
combinations,
went up
basically,
there
right?
in northern Quebec.
Oh wow! Well, at least they went somewhere, not to scrap, I guess, in a
Yeah,
sense, right?
that's
but,
right.
But still, it's because must remember that there were meticulous codes for everything,
Yeah,
right? Where it
yeah.
had to be the right interior matching with the right body color and things like that,
totally,
right?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing, we did make some station wagons there, and they were the ones with the roof that, like a convertible roof that moved ahead. It was a metal roof, which meant over the cab there was just a little roof, and then the rest of it was rails, and then the sliding portion, you could get it sliding or it was fixed.
Maybe the Wagonaire,
Yeah,
I think, right?
the
Yeah.
Wagonaire, and it was very, very popular. Now, turns out the first few we had, occasionally it would get to the end of the line, and somebody would notice that the roof over the front was not curved up; it was down. You call,
He's installed it upside down.
no, it settled.
Oh, it's settled. Okay, okay.
It was called oil canning.
Oh, okay.
And there was a lot of talk among the engineers, what are we going to do? And finally somebody said, hey, we're putting roof racks on there with rails. Let's try this. You know, there's about 4 or 5 rails that they put on. They screwed them in.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they put them in and they drew that roof up. So
Okay,
people
yeah.
got these cars with a roof rack that they hadn't ordered, but it had saved the day.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I mean now it's an extra feature, I guess, almost in a sense for those owners. But really, little do they realize it's just to fix the sagging roof that was
That's
going
right.
to be.
That's right.
That's so interesting, yeah, because
it was a solution. You know,
that's true. That's fair.
Yeah.
It came with probably the most cost-effective too for Studebaker,
Yeah.
right, and that sort of
yeah.
thing. So
In my career, I always figured if things went well, I wouldn't have had a job. Because I went to work for Ford.
yes,
And-
that's true. Yeah.
Things didn't always go well. There was always problems. That's the nature of the business.
That's true.
And somebody has to be there to fix it.
Well, that's fair, but
or cover it up or whatever.
yeah, that's true. But would you say of the years you were at Studebaker that you actually had a overall pretty good time, aside from, of course,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I talk
occasional, yeah.
about the interesting things
Yeah.
that went on.
Yes.
I could talk about the,
Oh yeah.
you know, every once in a while they would build a car with for going down to Jamaica or somewhere where it was the steering wheel was on the passenger side. It was actually on the drive. And these would come down the line, and there's a guy at the end of the line. His job was to take that car down the restaurant and drive it off. And they would stand around and watch him, because when one of these cars come on, it was very rare, watch him get in our side, the left-hand side. There's no steering wheel.
For the right-hand drive models, yes, that's true. That's true.
We didn't build very many of those.
That's fair. Yeah. Yeah.
We also built cars for Newfoundland.
Okay.
And Newfoundland back then was an interesting place. It had a narrow gauge railway, but it didn't have any highways. And word came through that they were having problems with the Studebakers because everyone we built, because of the road conditions, they all got heavy-duty shock absorbers and heavy-duty springs. And apparently some of them were breaking welds. So this engineer I'm telling you about, he flew down to St. John's, and he came back and he said, you know, there's no roads there. He says, in St. John's, you drive around and then you're out in the rough, and it's really rough. It's
wow.
really rugged.
Yeah.
So he said that they decided to, I think it was, put in regular shock absorbers on the front just to keep it okay.
I see.
Yeah.
In those days, so because not much was paved around in Newfoundland.
There was no
those
pavement
days.
other than
Wow.
St. John's.
Oh wow! So
The Trans-Canada wasn't there.
That's true, yeah.
If you wanted to go anywhere, you went by boat around Newfoundland.
good point. Good point.
And
'cause
when we shipped cars down there, They went by rail into Nova Scotia, and then they would have to be put on a barge and taken over to the other side and put on the narrow gauge railway, and then they'd go all across Newfoundland
Yeah.
to wherever they were being delivered.
Interesting. Yeah.
It took a while.
You'd wonder how shipping never costed, what the cost of that went through the roof, I'm sure, because of all the different places it had to transfer off and the time and
Well,
everything.
it's interesting you talk about costs, because shipping costs were very large. And they passed a law in Canada, and I think in the States way back when,
Yeah.
that when you got delivered a car, they had to equalize the cost of shipping it, so that the guy way out west, way up north, was paying the same price as the guy who lived in Burlington,
Yes.
next door to the
Oh,
plant.
really?
So
Wow.
and that's still true.
Yeah.
When you buy a new car, the shipping costs are quite significant.
Yes.
Because shipping
Yeah, I
is a
figure.
very, very expensive thing. Matter of fact, we spent more money shipping parts in and shipping cars out than we ever spent in building cars, in
interesting.
assembling cars.
Yeah.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And when I worked at Ford, I worked in finance, and I was an engineer as well.
Yeah.
But we used to cost out what it cost to make a truck. We were building pickup trucks.
Yeah.
And we figured 15 hours direct labor from the start to the finish is what we did.
Give or take, yeah.
Now we were paying them, direct labor back, this was 30, 40 years ago. They were making about $30 an hour.
Yeah.
And then with others, about $50 an hour. And then another $50 an hour was for the other people that were working in the plant and
Okay.
all their expenses. So that was
Yeah.
about $100 for 15 hours. So we were adding about $1,500 to the vehicle that was selling for $30,000, $40,000.
Right.
That was the added cost we were putting into a vehicle.
Yeah.
Which was far less than what it costs to ship all these parts into
each of the wherever they were the
plant
test.
and
Yeah.
shipping them out.
In and out.
Yeah.
Imagine if you switched the two numbers around and then said you were making how much it was costing to ship these things. That'd be pretty impressive, I can
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
That's remarkable, though. Because even now, I mean, well, I haven't bought a car in a long time, or actually ever at all to have it shipped.
Yeah.
But I've only heard people with stories where even actually where I bought my car, where they were saying, yeah, it's just too ridiculous expensive to ship this thing, especially let alone overseas.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
go across the Atlantic or anything like that.
Right,
Those
right.
those costs go very high.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
so it looks like that hasn't changed much, I guess, over time.
Okay, I'd like to talk about when the plant shut down.
Sure.
We found out in the fall of 65,
Yeah.
guys upstairs doing office jobs, they were in charge of bringing parts in. They talked to the suppliers. One of our big suppliers was Bud in Kitchener, who
Okay.
made all the frames.
Yeah.
Anyways, one of the guys in Bud says, I hear you're going to shut down. And why is that? Well, we don't have an order past March of next year. You're going to need frames to build cars. You're not going to be building cars.
Yeah.
So this word got passed around some of us, not everybody. But I heard about it,
Yeah.
and I said, well, maybe I should start looking for a job because I'm going to be out of a job.
Well, yeah.
So I went to this vice president, and I said I'd heard this rumor. And he said, yeah, keep it quiet, but it's true. So I went off, and I went down to Westinghouse, which was in Hamilton.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's
And
true.
I went in and got interviewed for a job. And he said, why are you leaving Studebaker? And I said, well, we're going to be shutting down in the spring. We won't be building any more cars. I'll be out of a job. He said, I hadn't heard that. Anyways, I didn't hear any more about it
Yeah.
until there was an announcement that they were shutting down the plant in Hamilton, all over the news. My wife was at home. She gets this call from Westinghouse. You still interested in a job? I didn't even answer them.
Oh, man.
I didn't. I went down to Ford.
But that's a tough situation, though, wasn't it? When you were told under to keep things quiet, and then you're in there and you're going, well, this is even outside of Studebaker, all the more so. And
Well, we knew that we weren't going to be building Studebakers because one summer I used to take summers off and go to school. I was working on a degree, but I came back and there were 3 Japanese cars sitting down in the factory.
yeah,
What are these? Well, that's what we're going to be building next. That's what we're going to be building. It's, it's a done deal.
I see.
And I was told that if I stayed around, I would get a better job.
Yeah,
Don't quit. I'll get a better job.
Interesting,
So,
yeah.
That's good.
yeah.
But it turned out that they didn't build Japanese cars. They did shut the plant down.
Oh, I see.
And so I said, what happened? And the story I got was that the money that was going to come in to set up this plant in our plant, it wasn't going to be Studebaker, but the money that was going to be invested in that operation was cut off because they went down to Nova Scotia and the money went into a plant down there that made stereo equipment and TV
I
sets,
see.
Electrohome.
Yes, that's
And that's where the money went. So
Interesting.
That's the story I was told. And there's all sorts of stories out there
probably that were
of what went on. But
Yeah.
I was told that was the story.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was an Electrohome, I think, out somewhere near in the outside of Toronto. If not, I think it was in Kitchener or something, where they had an Electrohome there or somewhere,
No, that
or Waterloo or somewhere thereabout.
Maybe I've got the name wrong. Maybe it wasn't
remember.
Electrohome. I forget what it was.
But one of those was a Canadian manufacturer.
But of course,
though.
like everything that got sent down to Nova Scotia, the money finally the government money got cut off, so they never did do it.
So that would figure, yeah.
Just like Brooklyn and a few other companies that went down there.
Interesting. Yeah, in those last days, I know, of course, now the plant where it sits now is just an empty lot, right? There's nothing that's been done with it.
I think they tore it down.
Right, or torn even, and whatever. But
I haven't been down there.
did they ever have plans? Did you overhear anything when they were closing as to what they were going to do with the plant, or they're just
No.
kind of just saying we're just going to shut down and that's about it?
No, the plant itself was built during the war
Yeah.
to build Bofors guns.
Yes.
It was attached to the other plant there, and they built Bofors guns, and then eventually Studebaker took it over. It wasn't really a good plant to build cars because you had to run lines back and forth, so you had to transfer things, and it was hard getting material in between these lines, and it wasn't perfect,
That's true. I guess the shape of the building, right? The
Yeah.
layout, because productivity was very important. I'm sure in the automotive industry, anywhere you went, those days was really that thing where you were being, probably you were being monitored for how quickly you could keep the line moving and that sort of thing, right? So
Yeah, and interesting when they would paint the cars, of course, they had to put them in a booth to bake them, and it was the only plant which used electricity to heat the ovens to bake it on. And that was because where we were in Hamilton, we were halfway between Niagara Falls and the plant in Toronto, which made electricity. So we had cheap electricity. And that's why they.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
That's why they had infrared units
in those days.
Baking the paint on.
Because what the auto turned is be gas, I guess, or something.
Gas is what we used.
The primarily one,
yeah.
But it's interesting because that's true. Because the proximity, that's right. Because there's a big generator in Niagara Falls, so why not? Of course, during those days.
Pumped out electricity, and if you lived in Hamilton, you got good electricity, you got cheap electricity, and it never failed because the power lines came in, and there were cases where the whole country was shut down with no electricity.
Yeah.
But in Hamilton, we had electricity.
Interesting. Because wasn't there a big blackout that happened back in the mid '60s or so somewhere.
Something
I think
like that.
And but I don't know if that affected the Niagara generation too. Did it?
No, I didn't.
Did it? Oh, really? So there you go.
No.
Wow. So
that water keeps flowing.
Yeah, so while everybody else out in Toronto was all out without power because of where they were getting it from,
That's the
interesting.
story anyway.
Yeah, well, interesting. Well, I mean, it's amazing because there are many people, I guess, around still that may had lived through that particular blackout, right?
Yeah.
But
We're talking about the people that worked at the Studebaker, and they were great ones.
That's good.
Yeah. And when they shut down, some of them were in their 50s. They had a hard time finding a job. A lot of the younger guys, there were places hiring people. The office workers, some of them went up to Bud and Kitchener. But there was stories. I was working with one engineer there, and he went down to Halifax. Volvo was shipping in parts in crates, and they were assembling them in Halifax, and he went down there to run that operation.
Yeah.
That didn't last very long, but it was a customs thing that was, they Volvo had taken over.
Yeah.
Another guy from up in the office, I don't know what his name was, he went to Australia and New Zealand because he had the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise for Australia and New Zealand. He had somehow obtained that.
Interesting.
And I think he did extremely well.
I'm sure. I mean, in those days, KFC was a pretty big thing too, right? So,
Yeah, Bill Moser, my plant manager, vice president.
Yes.
He went down to Ford because the truck plant was going to 2 shifts, and he was assistant plant manager for a year there. And then he went over to Bud in Kitchener, and he ran that operation for quite a few years.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So you're one of the few that ended up just going straight to Ford after that, pretty much.
I went to Ford. In the office, they needed somebody to straighten out some paperwork, and I went there for 3 months. They'd hired an extra 50 people because accounts payable had been mismanaged, and they'd had a backlog of paperwork. I kind of knew what was going on, so I was given a bunch of paper to straighten out.
I see.
And then I went back to school, and then I decided, well, I might as well go back to Ford, so I went back there and helped them straighten out that stuff. And, I have a long history in Ford.
I see. Hence, I would figure. But I guess, it started off, at least, though, working for Studebaker before, making your way out to that.
That didn't hurt that I had this background in an auto plant,
Oh, sure.
It sort of helps you get the job.
And an independent one all the more so, right? Because once you're with Ford, for sure, it's a very, very different situation because of it being one of the major manufacturers, right?
Whole different world.
Oh, gee,
It was a lot of fun.
did they at least do anything social though in the Studebaker days, or you had there were parties or other receptions or get-togethers?
There might have been. I was actually supposed to be part of the social committee, but I wasn't a very sociable guy. So because we didn't have very many people.
I see.
I didn't really get involved in that stuff too much.
I see.
I was only there 3.5 years.
Yeah.
That was another story I want to tell you.
Sure.
When I left Studebaker, I went to Ford, and I was talking to some of the guys from Ford that worked at Studebaker. They were anyways, instead of a pension, there was a settlement, and they got checks for $250 for their pension. This is back when that was worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
And Pat and I had got married, and we'd just bought our house in Burlington, and we had a son that came along, and we could have used that little extra money. So I kept looking in mail for the settlement, and finally I did get a letter. It was from the insurance company.
Yeah.
And it said, since you've worked for Studebaker for 3.5 years, you qualify for a pension when you reach the age of 65.
Oh, wow.
It'll be $13 a month. And I thought, I would really like the money now. But
in those days, 13 was pretty big.
I kept that piece of paper.
Yes.
Sun Life Insurance or something like that. And when I reached the age of 65, I started looking into it.
Yeah.
And they no longer were in Hamilton, but I found they had a head office in Montreal. So I wrote them a little letter saying who I was and what I had and everything, and I got a letter back saying, yes, we will give you that $12 or $13 a month. And there's several options, you know. If you want survivor's benefits, it's going to be a little bit less, you know, 50 cents a month less or something. But you can also take a cash settlement if you wish. And that would be $1,800.
Yeah.
So I was 65 years old. So I figured, well, might as well get that. So I settled instead of receiving a monthly pension from Studebaker. So I can say I'm a pensioner from Studebaker.
That's fair, yeah, in a sense. In a sense.
I got my cash.
But even then, though, because you'd wonder if it was going to adjust for how the cost was going up, right?
Yeah.
Because if it was going to be, if it was surely going to stay 13 when you were 65, or a little more than that.
Yeah.
So that's the thing.
But I happened to mention that to Stu Chapman when I met him, and he said, You qualified. He says, I wasn't there at Studebaker long enough to get a pension.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, what was like maybe at least a couple of years you had to be there in order to be able to
Well,
avail of that?
I was there 3.5 years. The people that were there 2 years, they just got the $200.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So it's just the extra year and a bit that made the difference, I guess. So there you go. There you go. Which is pretty interesting. Yeah, yeah. Here, let me go back a little bit though, prior to, because you we mentioned growing up and you've seen Studebakers, right?
Oh, yes, yes.
Were there other? If you hadn't worked for Studebaker, were there any other things you were eyeing at the time? If in case you hadn't been steered in the Studebaker direction when you were looking for a job?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
It would have probably just been Studebaker specifically, eh?
Well, they were local, and there was a plant.
That's true.
I could have got any other plant in the Hamilton area, because I wanted to stay in Hamilton. But,
I see.
Because, I lived here.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
there were several dealerships too, though, I think, right? Like car dealerships. I don't know if they had Studebaker dealerships around in Hamilton or not, did they? Or
yeah, there were Studebaker dealerships everywhere. Yeah. Because they ended up selling other stuff too.
That's fair.
Yeah, I eventually bought a car up in Milton from Gallinger Motors, and Gallinger Motors was a Studebaker dealer before they were. And I got to know Mr. Gallinger when I bought my Ford.
Oh wow! Oh, so they became a Ford dealer eventually too. Essentially,
they all became other dealers, you know.
Yeah.
No problem.
Very interesting. Was there anything else that you were looking to share out of curiosity there?
I probably think of a million things, but no, I think I've got everything
covered. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of good memories. Like you say, working for that company and interesting cars.
Yeah.
Because I've always been interested in cars. I've never. I'm not a mechanic or anything like that. My very first car was a little English Morris Oxford, which it was baffed out, of course.
Yeah.
they were terrible little cars. I didn't learn my lesson for a long time. I bought English cars and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I ended up with a bunch of wrenches that only fit British cars because we have metric and we have American models. They had what's called, I think it was Whitworth or something like that. So I
third system, yeah.
I had to buy a whole set of wrenches just to work on these stupid English cars that I was foolish enough to buy.
Yeah. Because there weren't too many of them around, right? Because it was the North American market was mostly.
But they were cheap. And easy on gas.
Yes.
And,
I see.
But they weren't really built for American conditions, North American conditions.
I see. Speed was one of the things potentially, or were there other weather primarily, or other things?
Yeah, weather. For Britain is damp.
Yeah.
And these cars had a British system that didn't like wet, didn't like damp.
Yeah.
They had problems with them in England, and we had problems with them in Canada.
Oh, yes. Oh, sure. Yeah. And then snow, of course, all the more so. Yeah. Because what were the? Because I guess speed wasn't much of a problem for those. Like they probably had enough get up in them, did they as well? Or they were pretty all right in that.
Yeah, well, people didn't drive as fast.
That's the thing too. Because I was going to say,
And there weren't as many cars on the road.
yeah, because people wouldn't top 60
Yeah.
often, right?
Yeah.
60
Yeah.
miles. They probably just kind of go 40, 50 mostly, I guess, right?
When
Typically.
I married Pat out of university, she had to take summer courses in Toronto.
Yeah.
And she had this little Volkswagen. And she would start off in Hamilton, going down the Queen Elizabeth,
Yes.
very little traffic,
Yep.
all the way into Toronto. And
Yeah.
she came home one day and she said, "How fast do you think this little car will go?" Because she put the floor starting in Hamilton, and she wound it up all the way into Toronto, non-stop.
Wow. Yeah.
She must have been going at least 70 miles an hour.
Could be something I think, yeah, especially. Oh golly, and I think in those days the Queen Elizabeth was not completely straight as a highway as it is now, where it was maybe local road for a bit and then we're
Oh
going to
yeah, it
highway.
was open on either side.
Big traffic
and
circles.
Down the center was trees,
Yes.
which caught cars every once in a while.
Anyway,
We-
not then.
well,
Not when I drove it. Not.
but in the evening, some people did off the road and went into those trees. You know,
Oh yeah.
It was
Those cars weren't very forgiving if you did bump in those trees, that's for sure.
They
Yeah.
stood up. Yeah.
Very interesting, but yeah, lots of stories in that. There was
Right.
something I just had a thought about something we were just talking about there, but here's what it was. Thinking of Studebaker now as a classic car it must be strange to think about it because you grew up at the time, right?
Oh,
Even
yes.
cars of that era now,
Yeah.
when you look at them, people will think, "Oh, that's a cool old classic car, or whatever," right?
yeah.
But what do you think when people talk about it?
Studebakers did make some interesting looking cars.
Yes.
They really did.
Yeah.
They were ahead of their time in so many ways, some of them, and they're still very good-looking cars. You know,
Yeah.
Even the basic Lark or whatever it is.
Oh, yes.
You know, a square box.
Yeah.
Is very similar to what you and I drive, shape-wise.
Essentially, yeah. It's just,
You
but
know.
but how, of course, seeing how it evolved since then.
Yeah.
But of course, they had style back then. I
Yeah,
think now
yeah.
it's more function than style,
yeah,
or it's a
yeah.
different style, you know, right? But
Oh yeah, things are a whole lot different, but
yeah.
they're cars, they're four wheels, and they're
Yeah,
Transportation.
transportation, point A to point
yeah,
B type
yeah,
vehicles and things like that, right?
and the great big old cars were small inside and big on the outside.
Yep. Oh yeah.
But yeah.
But no, sir, but I think there were some Larks that were pretty roomy. I think, right? That
Oh,
felt
yeah.
roomy on the
Oh,
inside.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You
Yeah,
could actually maybe fit about six
yeah.
people if you had the front
Oh, yeah.
bench. Maybe.
The bench seats, yes. Oh yeah, the bench seats.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, honestly, it's been great to hear a little bit about your time with Studebaker. And I'm sure, we could probably sit and enjoy a little bit, several stories to reveal. But I mean, thank you though for the time to at least get a little insight on what it was like with some of the little stories that you had.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure there'd be other opportunities to share more. But at least for getting a little glimpse, just as a little glimpse into what it was like in a few days at Studebaker.
The amazing thing was when I started, they said, "We'll get you a parking spot." No, nowhere else have I ever worked where I got a parking spot.
Like a dedicated
But
parking spot.
out in the parking lot, there was a salaried parking, fenced-in area.
Yeah.
And you had a sign on the fence with your name, and that's where you parked your car.
Oh, wow.
And even if you were the lowest of the lowest, like I was
Yeah.
just a clerk,
Mm-hmm.
I had my own parking spot. Now, it didn't cost them very much to do that.
Yeah.
But it was a nice thing to do.
But it was a nice touch. It's very personalized, right?
It was personalized.
Well, if you were working on the floor, though, would you get your own spot also?
No.
Oh, I see. It's the office folks that got the lucky sort of thing there.
That's right. That's right.
No, Lou, thanks for sharing that,
Yeah,
and Pat as well.
yeah,
Great stories.
Yeah.
And
The money wasn't great, but it was
Wow.
it was very nice.
yes, that's true. Some memories to be had, though, for
Oh, yeah.
sure.
Oh, yeah.
Some priceless ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Lou, Pat, thank you so much, though, for this and
Well,
getting to share some of those things
Well,
about,
thank you.
about your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's fun doing this.